mentioned earlier that, you know, if we have a big crowd of people, we can block streets and they can't stop us and so forth. But the plan for going to the White House on Monday is simply to exercise free speech. And the expectation of being arrested is of our right to use our freedom of speech in public being violated. And the idea that we can preserve our right to free speech in any other way than by engaging in it and insisting on our right to use it, not just theoretically in the classroom, but by going out and exercising it where we expect it to be violated. I don't know any other way to accomplish that, whether it's fun or not. I think you have to do it.
Somebody else. Yeah, John.
The authorizations of use of military force, which were basically, you know, what we're living under now, specifically precluded the implementation of the War Powers Act in their language when they were adopted in 01 and 03. And Congress could have, and we tried to push different points when I worked up there, for them to review the authorization because they certainly had the right to withdraw it. It's also the case that there's a standing bill that allows Congress in any 60-day period to review and reverse a state of emergency declared by a president. It's been in effect since 2001, and Obama keeps signing it back into, and that's authorizing a lot of excessive kinds of decisions. Most wars, and I mean most, are covert. And that's not been addressed.
Completely outside the war policy.
And, or they're considered, like you said, in Korea, not war. And so having a definition that's more specific in terms of war, I think, is important. And an automatic way to review authorizations, of course, should be built in. But Congress, to me, was like somebody who's given the car keys to the 15-year-old kid, and they're sitting there, he's smashing the door, he's wrecking the car, instead of taking the car keys back. And you know, but ultimately, if you have both Congress and the president wanting to do the thing, and Congress rubber stamping it, then it overcomes these constitutional questions because it's not being addressed. But you know, and then I think this idea, this question of the federalization of all aspects, you know, is important. That they can create these emergencies or extra constitutional powers under these various matters, and that would include total militarization. If you ever go to Code Red, the highways become military, the phones become military, all communications becomes military. You know, you're going into basically what they call continuity of government, where a few people sit in a bunker and determine what happens, and that was declared on 9/11, and not subsequently revoked, as far as I know, because a month later the Post said shadow government operating in secret, big headline. I started to think I could write for them then. But you know, they have a lot of extra constitutional powers built into all of this when they want to go, and they're not going to care about these niceties. But I do think that you're both right. When they're in public, they talk about the founders, and when they're in private, you know, you don't want to watch. It's like what they say, like politics is like watching sausage being made. You don't want to see it.
I'm not sure there was a question. Okay.
Yeah, John, I've written more of those statements and put them in members' speeches since about 1983 than you can imagine. I put them in on, you know, the Foley Amendment on El Salvador to keep combat troops out in '84. But we never won because of it. You don't bring people over because of it. You bring people over because you get the speaker to offer the resolution. You bring it over because you got good citizen lobbying and you create a mood where you win it. I mean, you can talk Article 1, Section 8, blah, 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 all day long. The numbers that count in Congress is 218 for the House, 60 for the Senate, because you got to get rid of this stupid filibuster, 5 for the Supreme Court, and to override a veto you need 66 and 290 in the House. You know, the law gets redefined by what Congress is willing to do, and Congress is like a beast that responds to pressure. So this can all, as people have said, all change very easily. We've all seen it change. in Vietnam, anti-apartheid and Contra Aid and all that. We do see it changing with citizen pressure. But I don't think you bring people over by going back to the Constitution, much as I love to cite my father's own book. Clinton Rossiter wrote Supreme Court and the Commander-in-Chief probably in 1950, which has got everything in here. Although I think he did note that the Supreme Court always wins, but after the fact. They let the war end, and they say you couldn't do that. The CIA and its covert wars, and the wars that are spurred in civil wars that we do with our arms transfers to support other governments, are far more important than we've let on here today, and your point is well taken. Those are essentially uncontrolled. The system set up after the Church Committee in the mid-70s to control the CIA is an absolute shambles, because you're not even allowed to talk about what you hear in the Intelligence Committee. If you want to talk to your boss about what you heard in the Intelligence Committee, and you have a clearance, and the boss automatically has a clearance in Congress, you have to go to some secret room in the bowels of the Capitol, so the interference knocks away the electronics, and the Russians can't hear you. Nobody's going to take 20 minutes out of their day. And so what you're supposed to do, they say, well, just whisper to her. And you don't. So the whole intelligence thing is off the books. We foment a lot of wars on that. Since the so-called Chadha decision in 1983, for all your lawyers here, it's been a real mess trying to control arms transfers, because now one house cannot block them, as they used to in the old Arms Transfers Act. There's a somewhat potent mechanism called reprogramming, where committees during the year give money out in the appropriation, but as conditions change, presidents usually recognize a bit of their ability to massage the decisions of the Congress, but that's really a weak reed to hold on to. The reason that the members of Congress who agree with the founders will not, in private, when they actually pull the vote, I guess that's not private, but when they actually pull the vote, support a strict interpretation of the war powers is, and I only found this out because I went to interview each of the powerful members of the House to try to get them on our bill. And I couldn't get many of them on our bill, which was the real Eagleton War Powers bill, because they said, I won't go on that because I really wanted Clinton to be able to go into Kosovo. And if this had been the law of the land, we couldn't have done it, because the Republicans would never have approved Clinton to do anything. And then a Republican you talk to will say, the Democrats, in a partisan way, will never vote for Bush to do anything, so we can't really trust to let the Constitution work. It's so heavily politicized that members who want to be responsible, and now, despite what you've all said here today, that's most of the ones that I know, they really want to make sure a president can do what they think is the right thing, and they don't, I mean, you cannot imagine, until you try to work there, the warfare between the Democrats and the Republicans. The Republican staff there think that we Democratic staff are the Antichrist. Period. There's no cooperation. There's no collaboration. If they learn anything from you because you're trying to explain something, they will use it against you, and they will leak it to the web, and they will try to ruin your boss, and it goes the other way too. So in this atmosphere, it's so heavily politicized that the only thing that moves them is citizen pressure back home. Unfortunately, not lawsuits, I don't think.
Can I quickly just answer? I just want to, and I'm sorry I have to go back. We're like ships passing in the night here. We're talking past each other, Caleb and I. Caleb would have the panel be entitled War Powers in Practice Before the U.S. Congress. But that's not the title of this panel. It actually deals with war powers in practice before the U.S. courts as well. And believe me, as a lawyer who goes before courts, they care about arguments around what the founders said and interpretations of the Constitution. So I'm not going before Congress to testify and cite Jefferson and Madison and Hamilton. I'm going before courts. So in all deference, Caleb, to your point, my point is that we need to bring this matter before the third branch of government that has not heard enough of the resistance to this war, and that happened during the Vietnam War. There were repeated cases that were brought, and after a period of time, judges began to stand up. And that is the point I will leave at, that as much as we should do what we can with Congress and with the Obama administration, we need to also engage the courts. Thank you very much. Thank you for asking.
I have one yes or no question. Yes or no. My website says that the Iraq War is unconstitutional and illegal, both the Iraq and the war in occupation, or so-called war on terror, and I've got the case law to prove it there, I believe. Am I wrong in making that statement? It is unconstitutional and illegal. I could read a little bit of this. It's on my website, and I'll just make one of them.
House Joint Resolution, the Joint Resolution Authorized Force was obtained by fraud. It's been used to commit fraud, and it's unconstitutional and null and void. It has no meaning. You can't lie and get a law passed and then go in and enforce that law. And as a Naval Academy graduate, we were taught the first day, don't obey illegal orders. Excuse me, yes or no? Am I wrong?
You're right.
I'm right, okay?
Right, but irrelevant to the Congress.
If they're appropriating money for it, they're
But
submitting
it's
a
not
crime.
irrelevant to us.
It's not irrelevant to you?
It's not irrelevant to us.
No,
So if you appropriate money for it, it's illegal?
Yeah, I would say your description of the 2001 and 2002 resolutions as being without force now is essentially correct. I would agree with
I
you.
say it never had force. Null and void. You can't obtain something by fraud and use it.
Well, let me throw one back that's a little bit different. I was at the Pentagon a few weeks ago and bring up this exact same issue. And the well-meaning people at the Pentagon who were trying to figure out for Obama what to do in Afghanistan, but he's told them, of course, he wants to go in, so they got to figure out something to do, said, well, you're right, we really don't have the authority to be there, and the war's not going well, and the resolution didn't have anything to do with keeping the Taliban out of power, the 2001 resolution.
Right.
But how can you desert the women of Afghanistan? So I said, well, I said, and this comes back to your thing, if you want to go to war to defend the rights of the women of Afghanistan and send U.S. troops to die and to kill and destroy Afghanistan to do that, then you better come back to Congress, because if you look at that 2001 resolution, there ain't a lot in there about that.
The lawyer.
I'm sorry John has left because it's only a court which would examine the question, was it obtained by fraud, and no court will ever do that. But, you know, Mukasey himself, the Republican Attorney General after Gonzalez, said we ought to get a re-vote. I think it was on the Iraq authorization. But what's happened is that Congress votes the money. And by and large, the courts accept these appropriations, given in the circumstances I mentioned, as sufficient. It's not the same as a declaration of war. And indeed, in the preamble, I think, to the War Powers Act, it says that. It says you can either have a declaration of war or a statutory authorization which is unambiguous, some language to that effect. In other words, that a mere appropriation which votes the money for an existing war is not sufficient. I think I spend a lot more time on it, and I won't. But I'm just keep it there.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Let's take two more questions and then we'll be done. Yes.
Precisely who would you declare war on?
Okay, one more question. Do you have a question?
Yeah, well, I wish the other gentleman was still here too.
Yeah.
So
I'll take his part, don't worry.
all three of you. You know, you cited that the problem is Congress, and Professor Wallace cited that the problem is the people, and he cited that the problem is the courts. And obviously this is a multilateral issue, so you have to look at all of these different things together. But my question is that if you say that the malleability of the Constitution and its usage and definition as we apply law is contingent on Congress and the will of the people, and yet our people are the problem, and the media and whatnot has what I like to consider a war on our attention span. Do you think that there's going to be more and more problems that come in conflict with the Constitution, and yet we're still going to say, oh, it's Congress. It's Congress's fault. That's how the beast runs, and that's how it's going to govern.
Now, I know this first question I really want to answer, but I'm so old I already forgot it. What was your question, sir? Who did you declare war on? In this document and in the bill that pretty much is based on it by Mr. Jones, I mean, I think it's, and we non-lawyers understand the mood on the Hill, not the constitutional niceties. If Congress bellies up to the bar, like it did before the first Gulf War in 1991, the vote in February, I think, or bellies up to the bar before the other Gulf War recently, even though if you read that thing very carefully, it's tenuous as to exactly what they're authorizing. And Hillary Clinton still thinks she didn't authorize war. She just authorized Bush to threaten, whatever. there's a feeling that if you belly up to the bar and make a statement that a military action against anybody, it can be against individuals, it can be for a certain purpose, individuals might get in the way, you can say Congress has expressed itself pretty much in favor of an attack. So you could sort of go after Al-Qaeda. Now, on this other question of the Congress and being unable to respond to public pressure,
No, in using a response to public pressure as a guise to justify their actions when they're in direct conflict with the Constitution.
I mean, I hate to say it, but thank goodness the Constitution changes all the time, depending on what 5 justices think. That's the reality, because that's what the law is. Then, as Justice Marshall says, that's what the law is. So suddenly they decide in Plessy versus Ferguson one thing, and then Brown versus Board of Education, they decide something else with the same Constitution that was there. The same thing happened recently on gun rights. When I started working on anti-arms exports work in the 80s, we had allies in the anti-gun community, the gun control community. Nobody at that time felt that any court had ever said that you have a right to have a handgun for self-protection in your home. This was all about militias, remember? Well, the Supreme Court recently changed its mind. I mean, things change all the time. Congress will respond to that, and that will give the overall penumbra of where they act, but they mostly respond to the mood of citizens' campaigns that threaten their re-election. When Mitch McConnell made the crucial vote, the Republican who's now the minority leader, in 1986 to override Ronald Reagan and pass the Anti-Apartheid Sanctions Act, he said, I still don't agree with this. I still don't agree with this. I think we should not put sanctions on South Africa. It's a terrible idea. It'll hurt all the black people, who are, of course, in the streets demanding sanctions. But I said, I can't go to the football games at University of Kentucky anymore, because all the kids in their shanty towns are making it impossible for me to get into the game. You know, the citizen pressure is what convinced him to come over. And, you know, I must say, having met Nelson Mandela and him telling me if it wasn't for those crazy students, I'd still be in jail, I think that's pretty important. That's how Congress moves, in a very big way, responding to citizen pressure.
Can I just say one thing?
You know, I'm not really an anti-war activist, so Rossiter really has to say a lot to get me up here. First of all, his father's books impressed me a lot. Secondly, we do believe in the rule of law, and Justin, you should come to law school. And you use the expression constitutional niceties. God help us. If all we have is constitutional niceties. No, of course, the fact that the Constitution is somewhat in abeyance doesn't mean we shouldn't restore it. Of course we should. And as far as the people, well, I won't go to the people, I mentioned that before. The technical question, who do we declare war on? Students have written papers for me on that. Can we declare war on a non-state? My answer is why not? Why not? I think there's nothing in the history which says we cannot. You may remember that one of the early exercise of power was against the Barbary pirates. You remember Jefferson said, I want congressional authorization, not a declaration, authorization to sort of take offensive action. And admittedly, it was the Bay of Tunis and the Bay of Algiers, but they were sort of pirates. They were not unlike the jihadists. So that doesn't really worry me. But I think one thing is interesting from listening to Mr. Rossiter, I've not met before. He's obviously going to be a little bit ad hominem. You know, sophistication is one thing. You know, Herman Kahn, who was a real wise guy, with a book called Thinking the Unthinkable, We Can Use Nuclear Weapons. He said, we become so sophisticated at distinguishing shades of gray, we can no longer tell black from white. The country lacks fervor, it lacks passion, it lacks knowledge, it lacks education. We are so goddamn ignorant about our own system, which actually I think is a wonderful system. It's given us more wealth, more leisure, more comfort than any society in human history. But it's pathetic. The individualism, the egotism has just run riot. And we've really got to do something about it. It's not going to happen through Benson Scotch lobbying committees, don't misunderstand me. But it might happen if we keep on educating people right. You know, I'm a great fan of Obama, quite frankly. I think people are very unfair to him. On Afghanistan, he inherited 8 years of an incompetently run war. It has an inertia, it has commitments, it has expectations. I don't think he's going to go through with giving McChrystal the 40,000. I don't think he knows what to do, but that's another issue. And he's working within this system, in which you are all in. Even David is going to go marching down and depend on the relative civility of the American cops. It's like Gandhi. People say Gandhi was able to succeed in Britain, in India, because the British were gentlemen. The irony of ironies. You guys just keep on marching, keep on walking. Don't eat too much. Everyone eats too much.
But we don't have gentlemen in charge.
I was thinking we would end here, but we can't end on that note. Yes, if you
Not apologize to the British Empire. not
This,
now.
this question was really meant for John Boniface, but since Professor Wallace was right up there and alluded to Obama, where is the authorization justifying the drone attacks in Pakistan?
I wonder.
Excuse me?
I said I wonder.
You wonder. I mean, but that's a legitimate question. Does that should that be something that
I think
somebody
all of
brings a
this
suit
has
against?
gotten out of hand. I mean, Bill Clinton, someone pointed out, was relatively lawless. I heard Conrad Hopper, his legal advisor, basically, I mean, the system has.
Thank you.
I'm being pushed
It's
beyond
a
that.
valuation of your
I'm
time and
being
your
pushed
contribution.
beyond my Republican roots.
There we go.
There
In Wisconsin, we
On
value.
the other hand, if you go down to the Cato Institute, which I do, which is libertarian, they oppose war. Bob Levy, who is the chairman of the Cato Institute, admittedly he funded the Second Amendment case here, but he also represented guys from Guantanamo. The right does not believe in this unlimited executive. It's gotten out of control, clearly. The predators, the use of force everywhere without going back to Congress. And we've heard, and Mickey Edwards, who's the co-chairman of this operation, says that Congress is basically abdicating. We've heard many reasons why, but that's not satisfactory. The public should not accept that, goddammit. You know, that's one of the things we pay our taxes for, is for these people to function effectively. And I don't think that there are many of them who are quite able, by the way. They're not very well led. Look at the congressional leadership. I mean, it's pathetic, really. I wouldn't tell you it's the best, because I say, look at the congressional leadership. It is pathetic, is what I say.
Geez, do I get a chance to defend Nancy Pelosi?
That's okay.
Are you kidding?
Okay, we're basically out of time here. Thank you all very much, and let's give a hand to our panel.
Mike Fisher for U.S. Senate.
All right, before anybody moves, I want to ask the question, do people need a break? Or do you want to keep rolling?
We're okay.
Keep rolling. Okay. So I'm going to ask the professors to continue your conversations. So I want to say again, when we started to plan for this event, somebody had the crazy idea, I think it was me, that we should try and pass a sense of the conference, a set of principles that were at least held, that at least the majority of us held about what we've learned. And so I frankly have no idea if this will work. I will say that I got my training in how to run groups by running prevention groups for adolescents who are having troubles with drug, alcohol, pregnancy prevention, and dropout prevention. So I don't mind coming into a space having absolutely no idea how it's going to work out, though I do like to shush people. So I passed out, so a few of us made an attempt at drafting something. It is intended as a starting place, not an ending place. We have but an hour and 15 minutes to attempt to move from this to something that we can accept. And I want to I want to set a parameter here. We are not trying to do fine tuning about language. If you don't trust the group that's gonna do the fine tuning about language, volunteer to be a part of the group. We'd love to have you. And so our goal is to accept a set of principles that, on a high level. I passed this out. Anybody need one? Different people are different types of learners. Some people need a minute to read it. Some people maybe need to have it read out loud. I hear a request for 5 minutes.
Could we have one question first?
Yes.
What is a principle? I think I have a definition, but what is basically the idea here? Principle.
I actually am going to act as moderator. Anybody want to answer that question? What do we mean by principle?
An action
An idea.
or a duty.
An idea, a duty, Benson?
Well, I see it maybe as an analogy between a statute and then the regulations that spell out what the statute means in detail. They should be maybe broad statements, not attempting to get too complicated, but the regulations should never change. They should elaborate in detail, but not change what the principle is or the law.
Is the rule.
It's the rule. All right. We're going to give ourselves 5 minutes for silent reading.
The unabridged dictionary says it's the beginning.
We can't have silent reading if
Okay,
you're
great.
asking
Okay,
questions.
all right. I've read it.
How's everybody doing?
Almost ready.
So let me say a little bit about what I expect to happen. First, I think we're going to need a post-conference editing committee. This is not a committee that's going to meet in person. This is a committee that's going to work over emails to pound out wordsmithing. So I want to invite, I should have said this before we did our 5 minutes. I want to invite anybody that has wordsmithing type issues to submit those ideas in writing. There's 2 other possibilities. One, that we've missed a basic principle and you'd like to propose it to the group. And the